So here we are, we're gonna code the solution for WC. I'm gonna pick up with where I'd showed you from the introduction, and we already are counting the number of lines, and we talked just a little bit about how to make the number of lines print in a field. Let's see, I need an F string and then a number of lines. I want to print this in a field that's 8 characters wide. I want that to be followed by a space, and then I'm going to put the file handle name. So let's just run that for the moment. And we see it prints 1 because there's 1 line of input, and then it prints that in a character in a field 8 characters wide. It prints a single space, and then it prints the name of the file handle. And you'll notice that this works if I use the redirect version as well. Because I said that this program, when it gets no inputs at all, it should read from standard in, that's all I had to do. I didn't have to change anything about the logic of my program. It was handled right here. Either we're reading from input files. If anything is provided, it must be a readable file. And if nothing is provided, then we're going to just simply read from sys.standardin. So the logic of the program didn't need to change at all. It doesn't matter if we're reading from standard in or from a file. It just still looks like a file to our program. So we've already defined number of lines. Now we can define number of words is equal to 0. And I showed you that the words, we can get the words by taking the line and splitting it. That's going to give us a list, and so we can get the length of that list, and that will give us the number of words. So really what we want is for number of words to go up by the length of that line. And now I can print the number of lines and then the number of words. And let's see how we're doing. That is looking pretty good. So it's 1 line and there's 9 words in the fox.txt file. Then the other thing that we also want to count is the number of bytes. That's going to be 0 to start off with. And then the number of bytes is going to go up by the length of the line itself. Whoops, that's not what I wanted. By the length of the line. And then I want to take this and do the same thing, but for number of bytes. And then let's see how this looks. That looks right. 1 line, 9 words, 45 bytes. Let's run tests and see how we're doing. Okay, we look good on the file exists. It creates a usage. It was given a bad file. So for instance, this was something that I kind of glossed over in the beginning, but if I were to try to run this program with some garbage input, it would say there's no such file or directory. So that's something that argparse is doing for us right away because we've defined this as file type R, readable file. That's not a readable file, so argparse is going to throw that away. What else were we passing? We're passing the empty file. So inside of here, there's an inputs directory just inside of this directory. I put a few other files, like for instance, there's a file that has nothing at all. It's just the empty file. So it should be zeros all the way across, and that works. There's another one that has, if we were to cat the inputs 1 file, there's a single line with a single character. So if I run this on that, inputs 1, it should show 1 line, 1 character, 2 bytes. Because there's the letter A and then it's followed by a new line. Same thing with the inputs 2. There are 2 lines, 2 characters. So if we run that on our program, inputs 2, we see 2 lines, 2 characters. 4, because each line has has a character and then a new line, so that adds up to 4 bytes. So those all look good. What are we failing on? We're failing on when there's more than 1 file. So it's a little difficult to read this output, but the reason why it's failing is because it's expecting that total line. It's expecting the line that says total equals, and it's not getting that. So in addition to counting the number of lines, words, and bytes, we need to have a total, a running total that we need to add to as well. And so just the way that these variables needed to be defined before we started using them inside this for loop. We need to define variables for the totals outside of this. And I want to show you a trick here. I can define all of these on one line. Whoops. So number of lines, number of words, and number of bytes is equal to 0, 0, 0. So it just makes the program take up a little bit less vertical space to define all of these on one line. Technically, what I'm doing is over here on the right-hand side, I'm creating a tuple that has 3 elements in it, and then I'm destructuring or unpacking that tuple into these 3 variables. So I can do exactly the same thing here, but here, but for total. And I'm going to call these total lines, total words, and total bytes. And then I want the same print statement here to occur down here. If the length of args.file is greater than 1, then I want to print a total. And so instead of printing the file handle name, I'm going to print the word total. And instead of printing the number of lines, I'm going to print the total lines, the total words, and the total number of bytes. And if I run this now, so it's failing when I give it more than one input. So let's give it more than one input. If I give it everything that's in the inputs directory here, the one that's relative to where I'm running the program, then I'm seeing it's printing 0 for the totals, but it's at least printing the total line. The reason is because I never added these running totals, these running sums to the totals. So I need to do that. I can do it after this print statement. I can say total lines should go up by the number of lines that we saw here. And then I need to do the same for total words. Needs to go up by the number of words. And then total bytes should go up by the number of bytes that I saw. And with that, it should work. Looks like it works. Does it work? Let's run the test suite. And it does. It's reading from more than one file, and it's also reading from standard in. So that is how I would write this program. I'm sure. Let me just scan through the text to see if there was anything else that I wanted to talk about. I think I hit all of these. So in this, we've talked about, to review, up here, we defined in args using the star. That was new. That means 0 or more of this positional argument. These arguments, this is new here, using the type of argparse file type to validate any arguments that are given must be readable files. Here was the first time that we're using sys.standardin to read from standard in. It looks just like a file, but it allows us to read from standard in, which means that we can pipe our program now. For instance, we could cat the readme, which cat spits that to the output, to standard out. We can pipe that into the program that we just wrote called wc.py, and now it immediately reads from standard in. That's pretty cool. So we learned that. We learned how to do 2 levels of for loops, looping over both the file, and then we learned how to loop over each line in an open file handle. We learned how to set up tuples here and destructure them into separate variables. We learned how to count the number of lines, how to split a line into words, and then how to count the number of characters on a line. And then we learned a little bit about formatting strings, about how to format a number into a field that's 8 characters wide. And we learned how to do a little bit of a testing here of the number of arguments that we have and deciding whether we need to print a total line. So pretty fun little project. I recommend in the going further that there are a few other things that you could do. Like for instance, we've seen the cat program several times. Why don't you write your own version of cat? Write your own version of head. So if I say head readme, by default it shows me, well actually let's find out how many lines does it show me. It shows me 10 lines of output. Same with tail. Tail, how many lines does it show? by default shows me 10, and it shows the bottom of a file. So head shows the first 10 lines of a file, tail will show you the last 10 lines of a file, and both of those respond to a -n argument for the number of lines. So it's actually an option. The default is 10. So write your own version of head and tail. There's also a program called tack that will print the lines of a file in reverse order. So tack is the reverse of cat. So write your own versions of those system tools, and you'll learn a lot about file handling and things like that in Python.